I'm going to put you flat on this grass in front of your little girl." Brandon Hayes shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to turn around. He tossed a pair of gloves at Marcus Reed's feet and waited. Marcus never looked at the gloves. He watched Brandon's hands instead. No one in Oak Creek thought there was anything unusual about the quiet black single father standing across from him. He was known as the man who never raised his voice, no matter how much he was provoked. But no one noticed his balanced stance, his calm focus, or the way his eyes stayed fixed on Brandon's movements instead of his face. That wasn't the posture of a man who had spent his life behind a desk. So why would someone capable of ending the fight in seconds choose to stay silent? If you enjoy stories where the quietest person in the room turns out to be the most dangerous, subscribe now, because this story is only getting started. Marcus Reed had built a peaceful life from simple routines. Morning runs before his daughter Emma woke up, a small vegetable garden behind the house, coffee growing cold on the porch while the neighborhood came to life. He greeted neighbors with a nod or a wave, never seeking attention. To everyone on the street, he was simply a quiet black man in his mid-40s raising his 16-year-old daughter alone after losing his wife 3 years earlier. He worked from home as a security contractor, paid his bills on time, kept to himself, and caused no trouble. But the neighborhood never saw the habits he couldn't leave behind. He always chose the seat with his back against the wall. He slept only a few hours each night, yet stayed alert until dawn. He could dismantle and reassemble the lock on his front door faster than most people could find their keys. Marcus had spent 16 years in the Navy, the last 11 leading missions that remain classified. He had commanded SEAL Team 7 through dangerous deployments that never appeared in public records. When he retired, he carried only 2 things with him: a promise to his dying wife, Rachel, and a discipline of silence so complete it had become part of who he was. Rachel hadn't asked him to erase his past. She had only said, "Make sure Emma grows up knowing you as more than what the war turned you into." Marcus misunderstood those words. He buried everything. No stories. No medals. No explanations. No trace of the man he used to be. For 3 years, he believed silence was the best way to honor her. His government consulting work still came through secure late-night calls using a voice Emma had never heard before. His newest assignment involved reviewing companies competing for a Department of Defense logistics contract. One file centered on a trucking company connected to a devastating brake failure that had left the driver permanently injured. Critical maintenance records had disappeared. Marcus knew only the case number. He had no idea that the owner of that company was about to move in next door. The Hayes family arrived one Thursday with moving trucks and plenty of confidence. William Hayes introduced himself to every neighbor before sunset, proudly talking about his business, Hayes Freight, and joking that his son's right hook was more dangerous than rising property taxes. William shook Marcus's hand over the backyard fence, mentioning how nice it was to have a security professional nearby. Marcus smiled politely. Neither man realized they were already connected by a classified government investigation. William's son, Brandon, was 21 years old, strong, disciplined, a black belt in karate, a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, an undefeated amateur MMA fighter, attracting attention from sponsors. His skills were real. His self-control wasn't. Marcus recognized almost immediately. Brandon had been raised believing one rule above everything else: a Hayes never looks weak. The result was a talented young fighter who treated every disagreement like a match that had to be won. Marcus chose to ignore him. Peace, he believed, meant staying out of other people's problems. For several weeks, it seemed to work. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Emma was washing her car in the driveway with music playing quietly. Brandon walked over, reached through her open window, and snapped off the volume knob. He complained the music was distracting his training. When Emma told him to leave, he grabbed her phone and threw it into the street. "You should learn your place before you get yourself hurt," he warned. Marcus watched everything from the porch. He calmly walked over, picked up Emma's phone, handed it back to her, then looked at Brandon. "Don't touch anything on his property that doesn't belong to you," he said quietly. "Apologize to my daughter and don't come back." Brandon stepped closer, using his size to intimidate him. "A man who hides inside his house shouldn't tell me what to do," he sneered. "Especially when I can finish a fight with one punch." Marcus didn't answer. He simply stood there. Brandon laughed. mistook silence or fear, and walked away with his friends. That night, Emma quietly started saving everything on her phone. She never told her father. The first serious crack in the calm came 6 weeks later. Marcus was talking with William over the backyard fence when William casually mentioned that Hayes Freight was dealing with a federal safety investigation connected to a truck accident earlier that year. Marcus kept his face expressionless, but inside, the case number in his locked file matched instantly. The company under federal review was Hayes Freight. For the first time, Marcus knew exactly who his neighbor was. William noticed a brief pause in Marcus's eyes. He didn't know why, but it was enough to make him suspicious. From that day forward, everything changed. William realized that if the federal reviewer investigating his company could be drawn into a public confrontation, any decision against Hayes Freight could later be challenged as biased. He didn't need Marcus to move away. He only needed Marcus to lose his temper. And he already had the perfect weapon. His son, William, quietly encouraged Brandon's behavior. He never directly ordered him to start trouble. He simply ignored every escalation and made it clear that any consequences could be handled. Brandon needed very little encouragement. He already disliked Marcus for reasons that had nothing to do with Marcus himself. One Friday afternoon, while Emma and several classmates worked on a school project in the backyard, Brandon arrived with 2 friends. He began kicking apart the row of lilac bushes Rachel had planted before she died. Then he shouted insults toward the deck. Marcus walked outside. "Leave my property." Brandon crossed the property line, grabbed Marcus by the collar, and shoved him backward toward Emma. Everything happened in less than a second. Marcus caught Brandon's wrist, turned his hips, redirected the force, and suddenly Brandon was kneeling in the grass, unable to move. No punches, no injuries, just flawless technique. Marcus released him immediately. "It's slippery," he said calmly, helping Brandon back to his feet as if nothing had happened. Humiliation burned deeper than pain. Brandon said nothing, but everyone could see this wasn't over. An hour later, William stormed over, threatening lawsuits, city officials, and expensive legal battles. Marcus listened quietly. When William finally drove away, Marcus sat alone on his porch. For the first time, he admitted something to himself. His silence wasn't protecting Emma. Every time he accepted another insult, Brandon pushed the line even farther. Maybe he hadn't understood Rachel's final wish as well as he thought. When Emma came outside and asked if everything was okay, Marcus gave the same answer he always did. "It's handled." She nodded, but this time she looked unconvinced. Labor Day arrived. The neighborhood gathered for its annual cookout. Families filled the park with folding tables, grills, and children playing across the grass. Marcus hoped for one ordinary afternoon, just a father spending time with his daughter. For the first hour, everything felt peaceful. Emma laughed with her friends. Marcus chatted with neighbors while quietly positioning himself where he could see both the parking lot and his daughter without thinking about it. Old habits never disappeared. Then William arrived. He drove in with imported beer and his usual confidence. Brandon followed behind him carrying a pair of MMA gloves. For friends walked behind him, already recording with their phones. The atmosphere changed instantly. People sensed trouble before anyone spoke. Brandon crossed the grass and threw the gloves at Marcus's feet. "Our last match didn't count," he shouted. "Today, everyone gets to see who's really stronger." Phones rose into the air. Neighbors backed away. Marcus ignored the gloves. Instead, he stepped sideways until he stood directly between Brandon and Emma. "I'm not fighting you," he said quietly. "Step away from my daughter." Brandon laughed loudly for the crowd. Then he crossed a line no one expected. He mocked Rachel, a woman he had never even met. Then he turned toward Emma. "You deserve a father who's willing to defend his own name instead of hiding like a coward." William stood nearby smiling. "I'll even cover the hospital bill," he joked. Emma grabbed Marcus's sleeve. "Dad, please don't." Her trembling voice hurt Marcus far more than Brandon's insults ever could. Still believing walking away was the safest choice, Marcus turned to leave with Emma. Brandon mistook it for surrender. With dozens of people filming, he refused to let Marcus walk away. He reached out, grabbed Emma's arm, and shoved her aside. She stumbled onto the pavement. Her hand scraped across the concrete, tearing the skin open. Everything Marcus had buried for 3 years shattered in that instant. He rushed to Emma, checked her injured hand, made sure nothing was broken. Then he gently placed her beside neighbor Sarah Whitfield, who had already come running to help. Only then did Marcus turn around. His expression had completely changed. His voice became calm, cold, and final. "Apologize to my daughter. Leave this cookout. This ends right now if you walk away." Brandon slowly pulled on his gloves. He glanced at his friends to make sure they were still recording. "I'm going to make sure Emma watches her father carried off this grass unconscious." Marcus quietly removed his flannel shirt, folded it neatly, placed it on a nearby table. Then he walked onto the open grass. No anger, no fear, just complete control. Brandon attacked first. His hands were fast, precise, the kind of opening combination built from years inside the cage. Marcus slipped the first punch effortlessly. Instead of moving backward, he stepped into the empty space beside Brandon, redirected his momentum, and sent the younger man face first into the grass. A few neighbors laughed before catching themselves. The laughter hurt Brandon's pride more than the fall. He jumped up furious and launched a spinning kick that had won him countless fights. Marcus saw it before it happened. He stepped inside the kick, swept Brandon's supporting leg, and dropped him again. This time the kick clipped Marcus's shoulder. It wasn't enough to slow him, but it silenced the crowd. Everyone realized this wasn't staged. This was real. Marcus still hadn't thrown a single punch. "Stay down," he said calmly. Brandon lay there breathing hard. His scraped knee barely registered. For the first time all afternoon, doubt crossed his face. Then he looked toward his father. William shouted from the sidelines, "Get up! Finish him!" The hesitation disappeared. Brandon charged again, shooting for a takedown. Marcus lowered his hips, redirected the force, and trapped Brandon face down in the grass with both arms pinned behind his back. No matter how hard Brandon struggled, he couldn't move. "Tap," Marcus said quietly. "It's over." Brandon refused, not because he believed he could escape, but because too many people were watching. William screamed that Marcus was trying to break his son's arm and rushed across the grass. In the chaos, Brandon grabbed a long steel poker from beside the barbecue grill. He swung it wildly. The rod missed Marcus by inches. Its path continued straight toward Emma, who had broken free from Sarah and was running toward her father. Marcus didn't hesitate. He shoved Emma safely aside with one arm, ripped the steel rod from Brandon's grip with the other, and threw it far across the grass. Then he forced Brandon face down once more and locked both arms behind his back, so completely that the young fighter couldn't move at all. Marcus's voice changed. Gone was the quiet neighborhood father. The command voice of a combat leader returned. "Stop resisting." Everything froze. Standing near the edge of the crowd was retired Navy Admiral Robert Whitmore, visiting family for the holiday. He had recognized Marcus's movements long before anyone else. Now, he stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. Then he spoke one sentence. "Commander Reed, I never expected to see you at a neighborhood cookout." Silence. Every conversation stopped. Brandon lay frozen beneath the man he had mocked for months. At that moment, he finally understood. Marcus hadn't been afraid. He had simply chosen peace. Admiral Whitmore had served alongside Marcus for years. He had approved classified missions the public would never know about. He recognized Marcus instantly. Marcus slowly released Brandon's arms, checked both shoulders for injury, then stepped back. Emma walked over with her scraped hand pressed against her side. She looked at her father differently now, not with fear, with understanding. For the first time, she saw the man he had spent years hiding. Within minutes, William called the police. He claimed a former Navy commander had violently attacked his unarmed son. The first responding officer ordered Marcus to ground before asking a single question. The steel rod still lay plainly in the grass. Sarah Whitfield stepped forward immediately. The man who just saved his daughter from that weapon shouldn't be the first one face down on the pavement. The officer hesitated. Marcus stood calmly with both hands visible. William kept talking. Then the evidence began appearing. Sarah had recorded part of the incident. Teenager Ethan Brooks, who had been filming since Brandon threw down the gloves, had captured everything. The footage showed Brandon's threats, his assault on Emma, his attempt to use the steel rod. One by one, neighbors confirmed exactly what happened. By the end of the interviews, Brandon, not Marcus, was facing possible felony assault charges. William stood speechless. His plan had completely collapsed. The following week brought three new problems for the Reed family. First came the internet. William paid to edit the video. Every scene showing Brandon grabbing the rod, every threat, every attack was removed. The edited version portrayed Marcus as a former military officer who had assaulted a young fighter without reason. The video spread across social media overnight. Then came school. Emma walked into class to find students watching the viral clip. Several whispered. One classmate quietly asked if her father had suffered some kind of breakdown. Emma stayed silent. She made it through the day without telling Marcus what had happened. The third blow arrived on Tuesday. Child Protective Services knocked on Marcus's door. An anonymous complaint claimed there was violence inside the home. The investigator interviewed Emma privately. Marcus waited quietly in the kitchen. When the interview ended, the caseworker assured him she had found no signs of abuse. But protocol required the file to remain open until a follow-up visit. After she left, Marcus stood alone at the kitchen window. For years, he had believed silence protected Emma. Now, he wondered whether that same silence had left her completely exposed. Marcus faced a choice he never imagined making: to defend himself against the complaint. He would have to reveal part of the military record he had spent years hiding from Emma. One night, he sat alone at his desk. The locked drawer lay open. Inside were commendations, mission reports, and records from a life he barely recognized anymore. He read them in silence, then closed the drawer without deciding. But deep down, he already knew what had to happen. Emma learned about the CPS investigation before Marcus could tell her. She had overheard part of a phone call with his attorney. That evening, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, her injured hand wrapped in fresh bandages. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Emma broke the silence. If people had known who you really were from the beginning, maybe Brandon never would have pushed this far. Marcus had no answer. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that silence meant safety, that hiding everything honored Rachel's final wish. Looking at Emma now, he realized something painful. His silence hadn't only hidden his past. It had hidden him from his own daughter. He reached across the table. "I misunderstood your mother." Emma looked up. "She never wanted me to erase who I was. She wanted you to know me beyond the war. I turned that into a wall. I thought I was protecting you. I was really hiding from my own grief." Emma listened quietly. She didn't immediately forgive him, but she gently placed her uninjured hand over his. For the first time in years, their silence brought comfort instead of distance. Outside, the edited video continued spreading across the internet. Meanwhile, William Hayes believed he had already won. He had no idea he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus wasn't simply a retired Navy commander. He was the Department of Defense's lead security reviewer responsible for deciding whether Hayes Freight qualified for a $40 million federal logistics contract. He had received the assignment months before the Hayes family ever moved into the neighborhood. Neither man had known the other's identity when they first shook hands. Eventually, William's lawyer uncovered Marcus's government position. Instead of backing down, William attacked. He contacted every political connection he had, demanding Marcus be removed from the federal review. His claim was simple: "A man who assaulted my son can't fairly judge my company." That complaint eventually landed on the desk of Admiral Robert Whitmore. William had no idea Whitmore had witnessed everything firsthand. The Admiral listened patiently until William finished. Then he answered calmly, "The officer you're accusing is one of the finest commanders I've ever served beside. I approve missions that remain classified to this day, and I personally watched the entire incident you described." William fell silent. Whitmore continued, "Attempting to pressure a federal reviewer, concealing evidence, and intimidating witnesses during an active investigation are serious federal matters. I'll be forwarding this conversation to the department's ethics office today." The call ended. Within days, Hayes Freight was suspended from the bidding process, pending a full investigation. Marcus learned about Whitmore's report from a colleague. He now had full authority to disqualify Hayes Freight himself. One signature, and the company would be finished. No one inside the department would question the decision. He stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then he thought about Rachel. He thought about Emma. And he made a different choice. Marcus officially removed himself from the case. He turned every piece of evidence over to an independent review board with no connection to either family. He refused to let personal history influence justice. Around the same time, Emma made a decision of her own. Without telling Marcus, she gathered months of screenshots showing Brandon threatening classmates online, bullying younger kids, and harassing neighbors. She met with Ethan Brooks. Together, they recovered complete, unedited cookout video that William's lawyers believed had disappeared. They delivered everything to local detectives and to investigative reporter Olivia Parker, known for verifying every fact before publishing. Olivia asked Emma one question: why wait so long? Emma answered honestly, "For a long time, I thought silence was just how my family survived. Then I realized it never protected anyone." Marcus learned what she had done only after the evidence had already been submitted. Emma stood in the kitchen, waiting for him to be angry. Instead, he smiled. For the first time, he saw his daughter acting with the same quiet courage he had once carried into dangerous missions. Only now, she was using it better than he ever had. The complete, unedited footage changed everything. It clearly showed what William had paid to hide. Brandon threatening Marcus. Brandon grabbing the steel rod. Marcus pushing Emma out of danger. Every second unfolded exactly as witnesses had described. Reporter Olivia Parker published a full story alongside Emma's evidence, revealing that the cookout wasn't an isolated fight. It was the end of months of escalating intimidation. The independent review board needed little else. Combined with documented safety violations, witness intimidation, and evidence tampering, the findings were overwhelming. Hayes Freight was permanently disqualified from the federal contract. The company was also removed from the government's approved vendor list. After the ruling became official, Admiral Whitmore called Marcus. He wasn't calling to congratulate him. "You made the right decision by stepping away from the review," he said. "That's what separates a trusted commander from someone who simply wants the final word." Brandon was charged with assault involving a dangerous weapon. He accepted a plea agreement that included probation, community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. The consequences didn't stop there. His martial arts instructor, Coach Michael Turner, gathered every student at the gym and played the complete, unedited footage. When the video ended, the room was silent. Coach Turner removed Brandon's black belt. Then he banned him from the gym permanently. A martial artist who uses his training to threaten a child has already failed the only test that truly matters. No one argued. Several younger fighters lowered their eyes as Brandon walked out for the last time. Within days, his sponsor quietly withdrew its offer. His promotional videos disappeared. The friends who once filmed every victory stopped answering his calls. The attention he had built his identity around vanished almost overnight. The Child Protective Services case against Marcus was officially closed. The caseworker personally called to tell him she had found nothing suggesting Emma had ever been unsafe in his home. The board of directors at Hayes Freight soon forced William Hayes to resign. Years of hidden safety violations and the federal investigation left them no other choice. The contract William had sacrificed everything to protect was gone. Marcus expected to feel satisfaction. Instead, he felt relief. Justice had finally taken its course. Not because he forced it, but because he trusted the right people to do their jobs. He returned to work. His coordinator informed him that the Hayes file had been permanently sealed under the independent board's decision. She simply said, "It's good to have you back." Marcus thanked her, hung up the phone, and stood quietly in his kitchen. For the first time in months, there was peace. Several weeks later, on a cool autumn afternoon, Brandon appeared at the fence alone. No gloves, no audience. A moving truck sat in the Hayes driveway. The family was leaving. Marcus set down the gardening shears he had been using and walked over. Brandon looked different, older somehow. The confidence that had once filled every movement was gone. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Why didn't you break my arm that day?" "You could have." Marcus answered without hesitation, "I'd already won." Brandon frowned. He didn't understand at first. Then he looked toward Emma, who was kneeling nearby, replanting flowers along the fence. Slowly, the meaning reached him. Marcus had never been trying to win a fight. He had been protecting his daughter. Brandon nodded once. Then he quietly walked away. Marcus returned to the garden beside Emma. Together, they replanted the lilac bushes Rachel had planted years earlier, the same bushes Brandon had destroyed. Many branches had snapped, but the roots had survived. New growth was already pushing through the damaged stems. As they worked, Emma finally asked, Dad, did fighting Brandon break the promise you made, Mom? Marcus thought carefully before answering. No, I didn't fight to prove I was stronger. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. And I finally understood the difference. Emma pressed the fresh soil around the roots. Then she smiled. I never needed a perfect father. I just needed one who would stop hiding from me. Marcus couldn't find the right words, so he simply nodded. Sometimes that was enough. Father and daughter stayed in the garden until sunset, side by side, rebuilding what had been damaged, just like the lilac bushes. Real strength, Marcus realized, isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing exactly what and who is worth protecting